This is a BBC Radio 6 Music documentary.
It's an interesting feature that three of Britain's greatest rock guitarists were born within 15 months of one another and brought up within 15 miles of one another in Surrey. It's inevitable, given those circumstances, that their paths should intertwine and lead to mutual admiration and friendship. Jeff Beck's career began in earnest when Eric Clapton finally left the Yardbirds. Jimmy Page had twice been asked to replace him. Rejecting the offer a second time, Page suggested Beck and even acted as recruiting sergeant. The year was 1965, and Beck was playing in a band called the Tridents.
I think the truth of it was that he didn't like touring. I don't think he liked flying much. Not even to the tune of £80 a week, which is what they offered him. They didn't offer me 80 quid a week. I got £20 a week retainer. Cheapskates. And he called me over to his house, and I couldn't understand what it was for. He said, what do you think of this album? And I saw the sleeve, and I saw this motley crew on the front appearing from behind these bars. And I heard the name Yardbirds, and then he played 5 long years, the best solo that I think Eric's ever played. And I said, oh yeah, that sounds just about me, I'll take it, if the job ever came, I'd take it. And I thought nothing more of it. And then the Tridents were playing at the 100 Club in Oxford Street, and these two bearded gentlemen came up, and they followed me to the bar with a sort of tape measure, measuring me up for the suit, They did, I remember it. What's going on? Before I'd even agreed to join. And they said that Eric, the baby, he's gone on a little holiday, and I thought, has he gone mad or what? They'd put him away. And they would like you to join. And I said, well, you just fill in. Yeah. They said, just fill in. And I thought that was all right. But Eric had long since left. I mean, he was gone. No intention of coming back.
Under the management of Giorgio Gomelski, the Yardbirds used a blues bass as a springboard for unashamedly commercial assaults on the record charts. If Indian influences were in, then Giorgio Gomelski was going to try to incorporate them into the act. So it was that in the spring of 1965, Jeff Beck found himself cutting his first track with the Yardbirds. It was Heart Full of Soul.
Ravi Shankar was coming over a lot and doing concerts, and I think all the people that ever dabbled in sitar came out of the woods, came out of their little bedsitters and these two guys that looked they'd come out of a sort of seedy-looking Indian market, started playing a riff, and I was late for the session, of course, they're already muscled in playing the sitar and tablas. I thought maybe I got the boot and these two guys are going to join, I remember Giorgio was sort of hopping up and down with delight at this new baby of his, putting a sitar on a pop record. And they couldn't get the timing. They just couldn't play in 4. They were going all over the place. And the tabla player was a joke. He couldn't play. I said, Giorgio, why don't you just let me play this? And I got the old fuzz box out with the Esquire. I played on the middle G octave as well, 2 notes together. It sounded better than the sitar because it was more conducive to the record. And they said, okay. And the poor guys were told to go away. And then from then on, I started getting interested in inventing things, and getting by using guitar instead of somebody else doing something. And I know, well, she had me back again. Well, I will never make her sad. I'm not a heart full of soul.
complete with Jeff Beck's Fender Esquire, sort of a budget version of the Telecaster, and it made the #2 spot in the singles chart in July 1965. It was an auspicious beginning for him. Beck's first influences in his early teens had been Buddy Holly, Eddie Cochran and Gene Vincent. Not initially, at least, Elvis Presley.
The talker at school was of this hip swiveling guy, and I wasn't really interested in that kind of thing. You know, at sort of 12 and 13, you don't get into all that sexual thing, I suppose. It didn't mean anything. And this scandal was going about Elvis, the sex symbol, and I wanted to hear the guitar. So I had to sort of wait a while before I got into Scotty Moore's playing, because it was associated with Presley. But Vincent, nobody knew anything about him. All I could hear was this raucous, screaming electric guitar. On all the records, there'd be 3 guitar solos on some tracks. And that was just me, all over. I started learning and copying all his licks. Cliff Gallop's.
Yet another of his influences was James Burton.
Yeah, I was heavily influenced by him. I used to sit and just, put the needle back and back and back, slow it down a few times, and hear it, and backwards and forwards, and, every way, just to hear it, all the different ways you could learn how it was done. And that's really a good way of learning. I suppose like you learn a language by listening, by repetitive hearings. You pick up things parrot fashion. But with a mechanical thing like a guitar, you've got to know how it was done, and you have to suss it out. So it's pretty good therapy, listening, copying.
In 1959 and 60, Beck was working with a local semi-professional band, the Deltones. Then came another local band, the Tridents. But his name and reputation were travelling further.
John Mayall, I had a request to play with him, and I didn't know anything about him. And I was in a guitar shop in Charing Cross Road, and I heard his name mentioned. I said, well, what does he do? Is he any good? And one of the guitarist salesmen was saying, he's the governor, you've got to see him. And I never did get around to see him because, he was a bit young to sort of hang around clubs. I was still 15 or 16, I don't know. And by that time, he was on the road and doing all the guitar work and the harmonica with a bracket around his neck and all that, and I just didn't fancy that. So I carried on with this group called the Tridents, who were just more my scene. They were really sort of playing flat out R&B, like the Jimmy Reed stuff, and we supercharged it all up and made it really rocky. I got off on that, even though it was only 12 bar stuff.
Beck played with the Tridents on and off for 4 or 5 years before joining the Yardbirds. The change from semi-professional to the Yardbirds was quite dramatic. Within no time at all, he was touring in the United States and visiting places he'd only dreamed of. One of the new singles, Shapes of Things, was recorded in the famed Chess Studios in Chicago.
It was hard selling the idea of a kind of progressive white English rock band to a hardened Chicago producer and engineer, but as soon as we cranked up, they realised that they better sit up and listen. And if you listen to that bass drum on Shapes of Things and I'm a Man, that is serious. If you play in a disco, I don't think there's one disco that will handle the bass drum on it. It just blows the speakers to smithereens.
If, on the surface, all was well, underneath, Beck was experiencing some problems fitting in with the Yardbirds. But for a while at least, there was always the excitement of travel.
Everything was a mind blow for me then. Everything I wanted was happening. And being in the studio where the actual big men had been, was just too much to handle, really. And I started getting aggressive towards the management because I really then realised I was being put into a place where I wanted to be for a long time, but still having to soft pedal because I was still an employee of the Yardbirds, So I didn't know how far to overstep the mark with it.
Look at any Yardbirds writing credits for that 65-66 period, and you'll find that most of the material was credited to the whole band. So how was Beck fitting in with the others?
I don't know, really. I never wrote any lyrics. I couldn't stand that. That was just an unnecessary piece of toiletry that they had to do, and it was to put the record out. I just wanted to play the guitar and get neat sounds on the guitar. I contributed my bit by doing that. It was great fun, and then sitting around watching the other 4 members of the group trying to be Phil Spector. They're all trying to frantically pitch in ideas, which was upsetting to someone like me who could see what was going on, or what they wanted to do, rather, which is slightly different. And then in the end, I became kind of alienated from them as part of the production. I'd just sit around and be moody and just play the most god-awful row over what they'd done, and somehow it worked, you know.
That Jeff Beck could afford to be so stubborn and moody at this stage in his career hardly augured well. But as a guitarist, he was hugely talented, and although he regarded it as toiletry, found himself doing the vocal on the NASA Blue.
That and the Bolero were supposed to be my project, because to keep me quiet, they said, right, you know, if you promise to do what you're told in this band, we'll let you some studio time, and maybe, who knows, you could put this track together with that, and maybe you could have your own album. I thought, oh great, and those tracks were just that, you know. The Bolero was towards my own album. The Nares, I had to sing that because they said that it couldn't be all instrumental. Simon Napier Bell, he took over management of the Yardbirds, and he was okay. You know, he thought, right,